Hey, welcome back everybody. Well, you guys keep giving me great questions, so I've got answers, so here we go. Are there a lot of differences in your approach when mixing something recorded in a studio environment versus a live recording post-produced? Yeah, definitely there are some differences between something that was recorded in the studio versus something that was recorded live. My basic goal is still the same when I'm mixing. I want to have a good foundation, I want to control the low end, I want to have a good panning, I want to have good spatial perspective, but there are some challenges that come with live recordings that you really don't end up with in the studio. Probably the biggest challenge comes from the fact that you have a lot of stage noise that's being picked up by the other microphones. The overheads are picking up, you know, amp sounds and audience screaming and all kinds of things like that that you normally wouldn't have in the studio. Same with all the other mics. They're getting bleed from a lot of different areas that end up in the mix. So I try to control that bleed as much as I can. Like tom mics, for example, I will either gate them or I'll delete the silence between the tom hits. Any other microphones that aren't being used on a constant basis, I will probably delete the space in between them when they're not being used. But overheads tend to be a big challenge, so I will high pass the crap out of them, so I'm getting mostly the cymbals, and all that other garbage that the overheads are picking up won't be in the final mix. That's not ideal. I don't like to high pass the overheads too much, but as long as you got good spot mics on the toms and the rest of the instruments in the drum set, you should be okay. The other big challenge that happens is the vocal mics tend to be not studio grade microphones. Like usually they're singing on 58s right up on the microphone. So you get a lot of proximity, you get popping P's, so you end up having to carve out some low end and high pass that as well. And you tend to have to use a little more compression on the vocals too because people are dancing and moving around, and so their position on the microphone isn't always consistent. Now, one more thing about live recordings: if you know that you're going to multi-track something and then you're going to mix it later, put up some audience mics. Because if the band wants to hear the audience after a song is done or between songs and you don't have any audience mics up, you don't get a lot of audience sounds from the mics that are on stage. And you always end up regretting that later. So put up a couple of condensers so you can record the audience reaction, but don't put it in the PA. You'll get a lot of feedback. That would be stupid. I wish you were my dad. Dude, that's very kind of you to say, but I already raised 6 kids and I'm not in the market for any more. She X. That's the whole comment. She X. I don't know what that means. I mean, am I missing something? Is that something the kids are saying these days? Or am I about to be murdered? To me, this video missed out on the most important thing. How does a DAW sound? They all sound different, so use your ears. No. This really depends on your interpretation of DAW. For a lot of people, DAW simply means the software. But for others, they take the term digital audio workstation a little more literally, where that means the software and the entire system, including the interface. Now, you will have differences with different interfaces because you are going to have different levels of quality with different interfaces, and that will make them sound different. However, the software is going to be pretty much consistent from one DAW to the next. If you could take the same recording and play it through multiple software titles, all through the same interface, same speakers, and same system, they're going to be identical. Who would ever use an SM58 on a guitar anyway? How do you record toms? I can get great snare, bass drum, and overhead sounds, but my toms sound like crap. Welcome to the wonderful world of recording drums. A lot of people will say the recording toms are easy. I think that depends on the toms and the drummer that you're working with, but they can be tricky. But like a lot of things, it's a combination of factors. There's no one magic bullet that's going to fix everything about your tom recordings. First and foremost, you gotta have a great sounding set of drums. The toms have to sound good to begin with, and that means new heads. A lot of drummers don't replace their heads nearly as often as they need to. So you need relatively new heads, and they need to be tuned properly. I would definitely recommend getting a drum dial if you don't have one. For us non-drummers who can't tune the drums by ear very well, having a drum dial is a really handy tool to have. Now, the microphone you use, it's important, but I think it matters a lot less than the sound of the drum and your mic technique. I've heard some people get good sounds with a 57. Some people swear by a Sennheiser 421. Al Schmidt always used AKG C414s, but we don't all have that kind of budget. But I would say that the Sennheiser 421 is definitely one of my favorites for toms. But if you have C414s and you're confident that the drummer's not going to hit them, these will sound fantastic. All right, let's take a look here. This one definitely needs new heads. One of the biggest factors I have found that makes a big difference is the angle at which you are placing your microphone. I tend to like to be a little more like this. I found the further you get like this, the more mid-rangey and bucket-like it sounds. So I tend to like to go back a little ways and open up the angle. So you're more at a, not quite 90 degree, but maybe like 70 degrees, and just kind of going over the top of the drum like that. Now if you're using a side address microphone like the 414, you want to be something like this. And then finally, let's put these away. And finally, a big part of your tom sound is going to be in the overheads. And a lot of people approach overheads completely the wrong way. Or as George Massenburg says, people tend to put overhead mics in exactly the wrong place. Your goal with your overhead microphones is to get a really good center image. That means the kick and the snare should be in the center if you are listening to the overheads by themselves panned left and right. You should hear a good solid center kick and snare. But what a lot of people are doing is setting up their overheads and looking at it in some kind of symmetrical way. Like here's the drum set, so I want the overheads left and right like this. But that doesn't necessarily sound good. It might look good, but that doesn't mean it's going to sound symmetrical. So the advice that I've heard from a lot of recording engineers is if you look at the drum set from a top-down view and you make a kind of center line between the kick and the snare, then you want to have your overheads equidistant to that center line. And that angle that you have can be up, it can be down, but as long as you are equidistant to that center line, it's a good start to have a good center image on your overheads. So spend some time listening to the overheads by themselves and get them placed in a way that you have a really good solid center image and that you have the toms going in a direction that you want them to hear. Then when you are mixing in those spot mics from the toms, you want to match the panning of the toms the same as you hear them in the overheads. What I will often do is go through every tom one at a time. I'll find one section where that tom is playing, loop it over and over again. I'll listen to just the overheads and then bring in that one tom in and out, and then listen to the sound. If you hear the tom here in the overheads, then put in the spot mic and the image shifts over here, that means you need to adjust your panning. So when you turn on that spot mic, it should just sound like the tom got louder. So I hope that helps. I hope that somewhere in there was a bit of information that can help you make your toms not sound like crap. So that's it for me for now, so keep the questions coming. I love hearing from you guys, and I'll try to do this on a more regular basis if I get some good questions. So see you all later.